Hey guys, Tactics Talk 40K coming at you. I might rename this channel like Tactics to Tactics Talk General because I'm probably going to be just doing all miniature war games. But wanted to talk a bit about today about different games. We all know that Age of Sigmar kind of took fantasy in a new direction. It's hard to not talk about Age of Sigmar being negative with all the stuff that's being talked about it, because Age of Sigmar is one of those games where it kind of tore the community apart. There's some people who are the GW, I'd say diehard fanboys that just like will sniff and eat anything GW decides to shit out. Because, you know, it's GW's shit stamp on everything, and they're like, yeah, it's our new thing, and it's our new rules, and you gotta play it because we're not supporting the other way. And there's some people who feel completely abandoned. People call Fantasy 8th Edition a dead game, even though I think that's complete bullshit. There's no such thing as a dead game. A dead game is a stupid word for something. I mean, if you're only playing a game system for new rules, I mean, that's kind of stupid, in my opinion. If you're somebody who thinks, you know, if you're somebody who only plays a game because you know that in the future there's going to be something new for your game, I mean, that's just kind of weird. I mean, like, I play board games and I know it's going to be the same every time, or I know it's going to be, you know, I know what to expect every time. Doesn't mean it's not fun anymore, because you're never going to have the same matchup against the same matchup unless you're playing against the same person with the same armies all the time. Then yeah, it can get pretty dry. But even if the rules changed, you're probably still going to not want to do that often because, well, you know, it's not, you know, it's not a big deal. It's not a lot of fun to do anyway. That's what I'm trying to say, I suppose. Anyway, this video is going to be about other games, because I'm going to be continuing to play 8th edition. But what this kind of has done to me in terms of Games Workshop and where my hobby and career lies now, it's no longer going to be I've always been a Games Workshop exclusive sort of customer. I never really touched the surface. I mean, I played other games. I played like Battlefleet Gothic, and I played Infinity, like some test games. I played a game or two of War Machine, and I played a game or two of, I've seen a game of Malifaux in person, and I watched a learning game of Malifaux. So, I mean, I've seen other games out there, and I kind of like those other games, but at the time, I was so much involved in Warhammer Fantasy and 40K that I couldn't really be bothered to start another game, and I got enough. Games sort of filled my kind of desires with both those game systems in mind. With 40K and Fantasy existing, 40K filling my skirmish fill and Fantasy filling my competitive and fluff. I love the Fantasy fluff better than I do the 40K fluff. So I mean, Fantasy filled that for me. So you know, it was kind of a big letdown when the Age of Sigmar came around and changed it to this other game format that really doesn't sort of appeal to me, because I mean, I'll just play 40K. It's just a better game. It's an easier game to throw together. It's by no means balanced, but at least there's the illusion of balance, and you can come to agreements by saying, hey, let's just take this many points and have a few restrictions on things. Versus where in, you know, Age of Sigmar, you really can't restrict anything because, well, there's no restrictions. There's not even there's no organization chart. The units aren't even formed into like heroes, lords, or anything like that. Even if they just did that, it would have made it so much easier to organize the game. Like, you know, slaves are the same kind of slot as, you know, a screaming bell. Like, it really doesn't make a difference. There's no like rare core special, or even just even if they just broke it down where it was like, you know, heroes, you know, monsters and troops. You know, even if they just did it that way, or special and troops, and got rid of the rare section, just make 3 sections. We could have been, you know what? We could have said, you know what? 3 of each choice, or one lord, 3 troops minimum, and, you know, up to 3 special or something like that. That would have been a fun game. You could have just been like, yeah, that would have made sense. And unit sizes, you know, no bigger than like 30 wounds, let's say. That would make sense. Like, all right, that makes sense to me. 30 wounds in one unit, nothing bigger than that. 3 units, okay, at least we have something to go off of. But when you have nothing to go off of, it's just almost a waste of time. It's not worth me trying to put in effort, or anyone trying to put in effort to try and balance that game, or make a common ground when you can just play a different game that already has all that format cemented. So what this has done to me is it's opened my, I'm still going to finish painting my armies. I got my army books for the armies I want to continue to collect in the future. I'll probably just finish painting my dwarves, my vampires, my ogres, and then I'm going to make a demon Nurgle theme army. I might pick up the Nagash model and the Glotkin arm models just because I like them and I want to paint them. And that'll be pretty much it for my fantasy. I'll just basically put them on the shelves and play with them whenever a game comes knocking around. And that's fine with me because the models look awesome, the armies look awesome on display, and I'm fine with that because I bought the models full well knowing that the game might end one day. And that's the risk you take when you buy anything in this world. That's just the way life is. So because of all that, I'm kind of going on to other things. I'm not going to go into it as hard as I went into 40K because, well, I'm not going to go into a game as big of a scale as 40K. Not even as big as War Machine. I think War Machine, I know that you can play an army with like 30 models, 40 models. That's still too big for me. I don't want to paint anything that size. I want to paint, maybe 10, 20 models max, like nothing more than 20 models. So any game system that has that kind of size to it, as long as it has some good depth and a good balanced system with like a good competitive edge and a lot of like player versus player interaction, those are the kind of games I'm looking for to replace my fantasy gap. And the game I think I'm going to go with, I think, is Malifaux. Mainly because I love the models. The models look really cool. For the longest time, I've always wanted games where I have to make a samurai, Asian ninja themed army. And Malifaux has one of those, and I think they look pretty cool. I want to paint up some of those miniatures. And the model count for the armies are, roughly 12 models for 50 points, which is pretty much a standard, what you would call a tournament list. That would be your army. So very, very low cost to play. I mean, you only really got to buy a rule book, which costs $40. You can use a standard deck of cards to play it, and all the rules are in that one core book for every army, every faction. So you don't need to buy multiple books. And yeah, that's basically. And then the army itself is going to cost anywhere from 50 to like $100, which is pretty cheap. I mean, you're looking at under $200 essentially for an army and the rules to go corresponding with it, which is more than fair in my opinion. That's fair. I mean, I might buy the special deck of cards for $8 because you know what, they made a pretty cool game. I don't mind supporting a little company that's trying to compete against these juggernauts like Games Workshop and these other game systems. It also seems that Malifaux is probably the more popular game in my area. There's definitely some Malifaux stuff going on in Toronto and stuff. There's Malifaux Mondays and stuff. I can always go to a game there if I wanted to try out maybe once in a while. Again, and also I can get my friends into it very easy because a lot of friends I have that see me play this hobby go, oh, you know what? That's just so much work, time, and money. I just don't got that invested in me. So maybe what I'll do is the model count being so low, I don't mind painting up an entire army of Malifaux for somebody, or entire faction for somebody that would like to play the game. And realistically, you can do this with like $60. You can buy one of those starter boxes for $40, $50. Painting 6 models for me, I could do probably in an afternoon and paint them to a fairly good quality that they would be happy with it. Maybe a couple days. Maybe I'll put a couple days worth of time into it. It depends on how I feel and how much I like the models. And then we can go ahead and play a game and flip some cards over and play some tactical miniature wargaming, which is what I want to do. For me, in my hobby career, and a lot of people are in this boat right now too, and a lot of people are very upset with this. A lot of people are like, just stay with fantasy, And I was very much so trying to be fantasy only, and Sigmar came out, and I'm like, yay, Sigmar's out, whatever, I don't like it. I'm going to continue to play 8th edition. There's a lot of other people who feel the same way. 8th edition now is in a specialty game category. It's in one of those games where you play it maybe once or twice a year now, and that just is what it is, unfortunately. Even though 40K is a far worse game in terms of fun and competitive, and in my opinion, it's not as much fun as Fantasy. It's not as much fun as even Malifaux. It's not as much fun as a lot of other games. That may be because I've overplayed it to the point of it's almost been played to death for me. I mean, there's still some depth in 40K that you can still get at, but for the most part, it's getting kind of dry playing 40K all the time for me. I need to play something different with new rules, and I guarantee you I can find some Malifaux people to play. And in your area, I guarantee you can start it with your Klobby Club. Take a look at it. It's called Weird. I did some research today on it. It's Weird Games, I think. WYRD is the company name. Is Weird. They do a lot of good community support. They keep their ears open to what the community says. They do erratas almost immediately when there's weird, quirky things that don't make sense or broken things, like any endless loops, for example, that would be found. They correct almost right away. And they seem like a company who truly cares about their community and truly cares about their customers, which is a good sign. I want to be with a company who really cares about the game. You know, like obviously they make the models, you know, but they're really in it for making the money they make is based on the replayability of the game, and they don't do big releases. Like they're not a huge company. They're basically going to be getting the sales. You got to treat them sort of like a board. Specialty games, you treat them almost like a board game. You know, you buy a couple armies, you pick them up, you play whenever you have a friend over that's interested in it, and maybe they pick up an army and then you play with that person once in a while. And that's what a specialty game is. That's what Warhammer 40 Fantasy is. The problem I see with Warhammer Fantasy is that it's such a big model count game. It's no small task in building a fantasy army. So you're only going to be able to play a game with somebody who's already been playing it for probably a very long time. Bringing new fantasy players into Fantasy, or Fantasy 8th Edition, that is, it's going to be borderline impossible. Because, one, you can't buy the army books anymore, which I don't understand why games will get rid of it, but I mean, you will be able to get digital editions for free, which is fine, I guess. I always personally like to have the book if I can. And you know, the startup cost to play is, you know, in the $500 mark. It's insane. In order for him to buy all his rule books, all his models, to get to a 2,500 point army, unless you're playing like ogres, you're looking at anywhere from $300 to $500 just to start up a game, which is a lot of money. Like that's a PlayStation 4, that's an Xbox One. You know, when you're saying, hey, instead of buying your Xbox One, would you like to buy a whole bunch of plastic? Well, that's kind of a big commitment to somebody who's never really been in an adventure game before. And if they're a 40K player, they may not even like the game. So it's difficult. It's definitely difficult. It's going to be difficult to get people in. But I'm okay with that. I'll still find there's a big enough community with Warhammer Fantasy that I'll still play a couple games a year and have fun. And I'm good with that. And I'm sure a lot of people are also in that same path as mine as well. So I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about Malifaux. This is going to be my first sort of Malifaux sort of video. I'm still going to do 40K tactics and everything, but I wanted to talk about what the game is and how it works and how it's different. So I don't know all the details yet, guys. I don't have the rulebook. I've just been following intro guides and looking stuff online, and I'm going to be ordering a rulebook soon from somewhere online as soon as I can find someone who's carrying it. I'm trying to find a local store that's carrying it. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like any stores in the area have it, so I'm probably going to have to break down and just order it from the website. And when I do, I'll probably just buy a couple boxes. I want to talk to my brother and maybe my brother's friend that are also old-time miniature war games. They stopped playing and painting because it just was too much investment in time, money, and work. So this might be a kind of a good little fun game that they could play in a couple hours when we come over. So I have a nice little hobby man cave room that they could use to play games here and there, and it'd be fun. So, yeah, I can even get my other buddy who's from college who's on a very tight budget, who could, you know, easily afford $40 to buy a faction and play a game. So, yeah, I think it'll be fun, and maybe even his girlfriend and maybe even my girlfriend can get into it. It's definitely something I can definitely leverage because of the simple. It's pretty simple. It's not super simple, but it's pretty simple. And I like it because it uses cards. It actually uses a standard deck of cards, like aces, kings, queens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like all the numbered cards, the suits and everything, all that. It actually uses, and it actually utilizes the suits as well. So if it's a black card, or I think it's usually color normally, but sometimes it does utilize the suit. So how it sort of works is, if you've ever played War Machine, you'll get it pretty much almost right away. It's pretty darn simple. It's very similar to War Machine, but it's different because it doesn't have the War Machine douchebaggery list building kind of way of playing. War Machine is all about sort of using combos and using your movement and planning out your movement, your game, your tactics in order to kind of chain something together to cause some effect that ends up winning you the game. That's sort of War Machine. Not always, but that's typically how I've seen it played. And that's kind of gimmicky. They're kind of gimmick lists, not gimmick, but it's all about just reading your rules and knowing everything about everything, which is, what I don't really like so much. I don't really want to know everything about every model. I want to know how my models work and how they operate on the table, and then if your models do something, if you know what they do, it's going to make things easier, but it's not going to change knowing everything about it's not going to change the game. Like, the most experienced Malifaux player could lose to a brand new player coming into Malifaux, if the person knows what they're doing. So I kind of like that. I kind of like a game where you can win. It's kind of like Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering has a good balance like that too. A guy who's super experienced with Magic the Gathering could lose to somebody who is very, very new to Magic the Gathering just because of deck build. And instead of deck building, the way this game works is it's kind of like crew building. You're going to build your crew with a strategy in mind. And the strategy can be very simple. It could be, go ahead and kill everybody and murder things. Or it could be, go ahead and perform extra support actions and stuff to help get you to where you need to be to, do your plan. And how it sort of works is, instead of like every game being the same, every game in Malifaux is going to be very different. Because there's a couple of things you can do. I can't remember what they're called, but they're basically like plans that you choose. And you can choose a couple of them depending on which army you are or what faction you are. And what they are is like things like, at the end of the game, if no one's in your deployment zone, you get 2 victory points at the end of the game. There's other ones like, if, this model's alive at the end of the game, get an extra victory point. But if you tell your opponent that if this model's alive at the end of the game, then you get 2 victory points. So, for example, I don't know if those are correct. I'm just saying these are some examples that I can give a generic person. So, for example, if I nominate a model in my army and I keep it a secret, and if he lives at the end of the game and I've written it down, or I have the little card, the strategy card flipped over underneath my army, or beside me, at the end of the game you reveal it and say, hey, I had this guy nominated, because you wrote it down on the piece of paper, he awards me a victory point, or 2 victory points at the end of the game if he's alive. Oh, look, he's alive. So killing him, so maybe you'll use him to be like go get objectives and stay away from the combat, stay away from the shooting, stay safe. And it's going to play towards how you use your resources to keep him alive. Because this is a very resource... Malifaux is a resource and player versus player sort of game. It's player manipulation, or deception, I would say. So it's deception and resource driven, this game. The better you are at deceiving your opponent, and the better you are at using your resources at the correct times, will determine whether you are successful in winning the game or not. Or how well you do in the game in any case. So there's usually like a main objective. It's like, get the objective, and then that's worth 2 victory points at the end of the game, and maybe there's 3 objectives. Maybe that's what the main objective of the game is. But you can choose usually like 3 secondary objectives, and some of them you can choose to reveal to your opponent. So, for example, if it's if none of your models are in my deployment zone at the end of the game, you get 1 victory point. But if I tell you about that objective of mine, I get 2 victory points. So when you're playing the game, you're kind of thinking in the back of your head, maybe he chose not to tell me about that victory point. So maybe I should get a guy in his deployment zone. And maybe he didn't take that objective. Maybe he took one at something else. either way, you don't know if you didn't reveal it. If you revealed it, well, then definitely you're going to go ahead and try and stop him from doing that. And that's, again, going to change your tactics. And whether you reveal that or not is also going to change, depending. So you can reveal these at any time. So think about this. You see an army in front of you. Maybe they're a slow sort of army that can't move very quickly, and he's not going to get to your deployment zone. That would be a time where I go, I'm going to reveal that I'm going to say, hey, my deployment zone is where, it's worth 2 victory points if you don't have a model in it at the end of the game, like hold the line essentially. And then he's like, your opponent goes, oh, okay. Well, then maybe he's got a character that has some sort of ability that makes him teleport or something like that, and then he can teleport across the table. Or maybe he's got some sort of way of doing it that you don't know about. So you'll know that he has a teleport ability, hopefully, because everyone has the rule book. So if you see that he has that, then that's a time where you don't reveal that you have that objective. So I know it's kind of hard for me to explain how this all works, but when you play it, it makes a lot of sense. And when you play it, it's actually very, very simple. It's very, very cool how the game sort of works. It plays out. On top of that, it allows you to cheat, and that's where the deception sort of comes in. So when you cheat in Malifaux, basically you're going to get dealt a hand of 6 cards at the beginning of every turn, both players. And then when you see that hand, you can discard any number of them and then draw that many back from the top of the deck if you don't want them. Typically, you're trying to get the highest number, the higher cards, the higher the number on the card, the better. Like you don't want to have like 1s and 2s in your hand. You want to have like, 10s and 12s and 13s and stuff. The reason why you can get above 10s because, a jack is worth 11, a queen is worth 12, and a king is worth 13, and an ace is worth 1. So 13 is the biggest number. A king is the biggest card, essentially, besides the red joker, which is, again, a special card that does different things. But, yeah, that's basically how it sort of works. So, you only really need a deck of cards to play this game. You don't need any dice. So you're never going to have that kind of bullshit when you're rolling to hit and you're like, my ballistic skill is this and I need to hit on 2s, and you roll like 5 1s. It's like, well, that was retarded. In this game, you can be like, oh, well, I rolled a 1. All right, well, I'm just going to cheat in a card from my hand instead, and now it's an 8. Okay, well, I hit with an 8. All right, cool. So, when you hit, your opponent has the defensive thing where it's like, I have a defense. What you're going to do is you're going to compare your attack versus his defense, and then you're both going to flip a card. When you both flip, you compare those numbers. You add the value of the card to your defense and the value of the card to your attack. Compare the numbers. Whoever's higher ends up. If the attacker's higher, the damage goes through. If the defender's lower, the damage is stopped. So it makes complete sense. Like you want to have high cards to do as most damage as possible. And there's all kinds of cool little abilities to make it so you can flip 2 cards taking the highest, and there's negative card effects where it's that you have to flip 2 cards taking the lowest. So there's all kinds of cool little abilities to kind of make characters that are more points better, and modifiers like that. And you can still cheat with any of these cards. Like you can still go, oh, I'm still gonna, you can still cheat to throw in a card to improve something, or if you didn't successfully hurt him, and your opponent can then cheat back in response. So you can't cheat off of another cheat. You can't cheat, then he cheats. You can't cheat again. Once you've cheated, that's kind of it. But what you can do is you can burn a soul stone. But you can only burn a soul stone before you cheat. And what soul stones are is another resource. And no matter, I don't know how many you play with. I think it's usually about 8. And you have 8 per game. And these are like kind of your big, like, holy crap, I'm doing something big kind of thing. Soul stones can be used to heal characters. They can be used to, instead of when you cheat, exchanging the value of what you flipped for what you put in your hand, you add the value, which is crazy. So you can get like attack values that are like in the 30s and stuff like that when you burn soul stones and cheat. So when you really want it to actually matter, you can get off your abilities. Now, you only draw a new hand at the beginning of every turn, and the turn is the game turn, not the player turn. So you have the hand that you're dealt is your hand for the entire turn. That means both in your movement and shooting, your action phases and his action phases. So that means you're going to be moving all your stuff, shooting all your stuff, attacking with all your stuff. He's going to be moving all his stuff, attacking all his stuff, and whatever. And then you're going to have only 6 cards for all of that play. Now, for movement and stuff, there's no reason to cheat for movement because it doesn't really help you in any way. Because movement's just static. You just move however much you move, and characters, almost all models have 2 generic actions. So they can perform either a move, an attack, or 2 attacks, or an attack then move, or so whatever have you. We'll get into that later. But it definitely opens up a lot of dynamic play because there's no phases. So if you have like a charge range of like 8 inches, for example, and you're already in combat with somebody, I mean, I've seen guys where they attack you in combat, they do damage. As long as they do any damage whatsoever, they can throw your model anywhere anywhere within 12 inches of where the fight began, and then that's one action. The next action he can then use to charge a different target and go after something else. So it's kind of like cool. You got this like guy running around throwing people across the table and causing wounds and stuff. It's just fun, right? It's just kind of cool. It's just like, oh, that guy's awesome. Some brawler, just big monster throwing people around and like kicking ass and all this and that and the other thing. And it's kind of neat. On top of that, there's all kinds of magic and abilities and stuff like that you could use. Not magic really, but abilities, let's say, that have casting values that do different things. Some of them are support things, some of them are, offensive things, and some of them are, they're all kinds of different things. I mean, there's some that just increase your attack characteristic, and some that increase your defense characteristic. Some that can do many things. Some that can do either thing. Some that point out targets that make it so they're worse, so you can debuff people as well. All kinds of different stuff. And you can cheat when you cast spells as well. And there's nothing your opponent can do to stop a spell, so spells can be very useful and powerful too. So that's a whole nother thing about how you use your cheat cards. If you're using your cheat cards to cast your spells, sometimes you don't have a choice but to let it just happen. And I've seen it where people are flipping bad cards so much where you make the mistake of not knowing. You always have to know. You kind of have to sort of plan out each of your turns. And when you have an army of like 12 models, all these guys can do things. So which guys you can only cheat 6 times essentially. So you're only really going to guarantee get off so much stuff in a turn. And what things are most important to you, right? And also in that respect, what things are important to you to defend? So if you think you're going to be attacked a lot, you might want to save your cheat cards for the defensive side opposed to the offensive side if you know that you need to keep your guys alive for some sort of objective reason that they don't know of. You know what I mean? So there's all kinds of different tactics going on. Now, that's where a game is interesting. That's where a game is, you're playing really against the opponent and you're trying to read what his strategy sort of is. And all kinds of surprising stuff happens all the time. And I watched even just a basic game with 3 models, 3 models versus 3 models. I thought it was going to be super boring and super simple. When I was like, wow, that's really actually quite entertaining. That's quite a dynamic game. Now, the game took like only 35, 40 minutes, which is still quite long for only 3 models. I mean, I can play a game of 1,000 points of 40k in 35, 40 minutes, except it requires, 30 models or 20 models, and that's a kind of a pain in the ass, like you're going to get the same amount of fun out of a game that only 3 models that, and it's going to cost you that much less. So I recommend you check it out, guys. It's really cool. Again, this is my first game outside of Warhammer. We're in 2nd edition Malifaux now, so it's been around quite a little bit because they've come out with a 2nd edition and they're coming out with new plastic models. They're moving away from metal, which is nice, which means they're successful. And it doesn't really surprise me. I can only see these games being more and more successful as time goes on, as Games Workshop becomes smaller and smaller. I mean, Games Workshop's a titan, but titans fall. It happens. Nokia last week just went out of business, completely bankrupt. And yeah, obviously people saw the downslope and knew that maybe it was coming. Microsoft tried to pick them up and keep them afloat for a little while longer, but it didn't work out, and Microsoft's dropping them, and that's going to be the end of Nokia. And it doesn't matter how big a company, it can always fall apart by stupid decisions or greed or misreading your market, misreading your demographic. And I believe Games Workshop has done that to the point where it's going to be the death of Games Workshop. So that being said, I want to basically invest in something other than Games Workshop products. So when Games Workshop takes a fall, or maybe 40K, the new edition, maybe it's terrible. Maybe they do the same thing they did with Age of Sigmar and get rid of points. And even though I can almost guarantee you they won't, because Age of Sigmar I can almost guarantee is going to be an abysmal failure on their part, to the point where it's going to just kill fantasy completely, which is unfortunate, because it was a great system and a great game and had so much potential. It still has tons of potential, but I will still continue to play because it still is my favorite game, and I think it'll still be my favorite game even after I play Malifaux. It's just unfortunate. I just really wish they weren't doing what they did. I really wish they just came to their senses and did some research into their communities and asked their community what they wanted. And you know what? If you give people what they want, that's good business. Why make something people don't want? And why assume something that people want based on what numbers you have? The minute a company starts making assumptions based on their numbers is when a company falls apart. Now, obviously, marketing is taught in a way where it's what's making us the most money. Let's continue that trend. That's what they say. And you know what? The guys in the CEO in the big chairs and the stockholders are like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's continue doing what's making us the most money. Let's just do that. All right. No, that makes sense, right? Everyone agree? Yeah, sure. Who can disagree with that? If you know nothing about this hobby and you were sitting in a meeting, I would be like, yeah, you're right. That does make sense to me. But you're forgetting what you sell. You're not selling soap. You're not selling, shoes. You're selling something that's a hobby. It's a niche market. And I think Games Workshop trying to sort of forgets that. They've become so big and gigantic, and they're making $23 million profit every year, which doesn't sound like a lot. Well, it is a lot of money, but I mean, Sears lost $33 million last year, and they're still in business. It doesn't mean they're out of business. It just means some years you lose and some years you win. Games Workshop has made profit every year in the history of since it was created. Since the company was created, every year they have made profit, which is extremely rare. And the reason why they've made profit every year is because they've always followed the same sort of guidelines. They've always followed the same sort of business sort of plan. And it was only until recently, when fantasy started falling apart, sales started dropping tremendously, was because they stopped making rules. They stopped making releases for fantasy. They started before Age of Sigmar, yeah, they did Wood Elves and they did Dwarves, and they sold well for the time, and then the sales kind of dropped off again. But that's the way 40K sort of was too. I mean, when Tau came out, Tau was sold like crazy. Now, I don't know anyone buying Tau. I mean, there's people buying Tau, I'm sure, but it's not super popular. They're not selling boxes upon boxes of Tau. Same with Dark Eldar. Dark Eldar, when it came out, yeah, people probably bought a bunch of Dark Eldar stuff and became popular. But now, I mean, it's still a powerful army, so yeah, I can see people buying it. Orcs, same sort of thing. Orcs and Tyranids, Orcs and Tyranids are definitely semi-popular armies. When the books come out, yeah, they sell tons of stuff. When releases of these little models, like the monsters, the White Dwarves are released with these little releases, yeah, they sell those models. And they can't do that with fantasy. They couldn't really find a way of doing that with these weekly releases with fantasy. I don't understand why. They could have easily just added hey, this counts towards your special choice. This is a new unit that is part of the Wood Elves. This is a new unit that is part of the Dwarves. They don't have to come up with a new army book. They could come up with new armies. There's so much background in fantasy that they could have easily been this is the new army. They could have released, you know, a small 3-box kit. Like, yeah, I understand fantasy, making a new fantasy army is a big deal because, well, you need a lot of models to play a standard game. So I understand that there's like, oh, I can't play until I have enough models. Well, what they could have easily done to reboot fantasy is they could have been like, all right, we want to start fantasy fresh for 9th edition. Let's make 2 game modes. Let's re-release Mordheim with a new army. A brand new army. It doesn't exist. Let's say that samurai faction, maybe. Maybe we'll release that samurai faction that was in that storybook from years ago that we never used. That could have easily been a full faction and a full army and had full kingships and stuff. And then, you know, you have Mordheim rules. All of a sudden, 2 boxes of guys, more than enough stuff to play Mordheim. 2 boxes of guys, it's still the beginnings of a fantasy 8th edition army to play a 2,500 point game. And then release stuff every week. I will buy that every week. I will go to the store, and I don't think I'm alone here. There would have been lots of people rushing out to buy those armies. When they do it with, like, you know, they could have done the same thing with. They didn't have to redo the stat lines. I don't understand. They're just like, you know, let's redo all the stat lines. Redo all the work that we put so many years of effort and time into. Let's just throw that fucking away. What? Are you out of your goddamn mind? I have never seen a company try and just throw away intellectual property like that away. Like, they've already invested the money in the rules and the army books, and the authors writing all the stories for all of them, and they have so much background, concrete, you know, foundations, and then they just tear it apart and say, this is some new game. Yeah, you're going to have problems. You're going to have big, big problems. Especially when you stop supporting that old system completely. Like, it's kind of like, you know what, we were selling, you know, Pontiacs until yesterday. All of a sudden, you want Pontiac parts? Yeah, we don't make anymore. So whatever's there, just, you know, it's you know, we're going to make another Pontiac, though. It's going to be called something different. It's going to be called the Chevy, you know. Well, it's not going to be a Pontiac, so it might look the same, but it's not. It's going to be using slightly different parts, and you're not going to be able to get your warranty or anything like that. So sorry, good luck to you, sir. That's basically what they're doing with Age of Sigmar, and that's a big mistake. That's huge, especially when you're trying to keep these customers around. Obviously, they're trying to bring new customers in with Age of Sigmar, but who in the right mind? I mean, maybe in the Games Workshop stores, you know, maybe in the Games Workshop stores. They can control their managers and say, hey, this is Age of Sigmar, this is the new game, welcome to Games Workshop, you've never been here before, this is our new game called Age of Sigmar, it's just starting, it'd be a great game for you and your son to start up, because everyone's starting from fresh, and, you know, cool. You know, makes sense, like, for those people. But for anyone who's running an independent game store, it's basically just gonna have a shitty taste in their mouth going, wow, they just fucked over all my existing clients, lost me tons of business, because I'm never going to get those guys back here anymore playing games. It's going to be harder for me to keep that community alive. And I got to sell this new Age of Sigmar bullshit? No. I would drop the fantasy products immediately. I would say, no, I'm not selling fantasy anymore. I'll sell 40K. You know? Like, there's really no... As an independent retailer, I'd be completely fucking pissed. Like, it would be unreal to have to deal with that. And then all your inventory is just going to sit there and rot because the game, you can't return it. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I would do. It's very unfortunate. They could have made both systems exist very easily. It was extremely sloppy, extremely lazy on Games Workshop's behalf on what they did. I have lots of friends. I have a friend who thinks it's the greatest thing in the world because he doesn't have to think about building a list. But he's not a guy who plays a game more than once every 3 years anyway. So realistically, why make rules for somebody who plays a game once every 3 years? That's not your customer. That's 1 or 2 people in an entire community. So, you know, obviously there's lots of people who just read it for the fluff and stuff. Doesn't really affect them either, but it definitely hurts the fact that if I was a person who enjoyed the fluff and enjoying the old dwarf kingdoms or the old wood elf fluff, and I wanted to see what the storyline was progressing, you know, it would be very hard to just start over again. Be like, forget everything you knew about it because it doesn't matter anymore. Sigmar's back kicking ass and Chaos is fighting them. And this is the new story. And everyone's back alive, maybe. At least there's rules for them. Maybe. For a little while. I don't know. Maybe it's just a throw a bone. Like, let's see. Like, it's almost like these new rules are like they're throwing this into the community and saying what happens. And if it fails, you're just gonna be like, yeah, fuck it, throw it away, we're done. And that's why I don't think anyone should even bother trying to start Age of Sigmar, because I guarantee it's gonna die as quick as it started. It might be around for a year or two. I don't know. Maybe they'll do a couple things here and there to try and save it. Their sinking ship of fantasy. But I can't see them pulling that off unless they go ahead and write 9th edition. And they're not going to be able to do that because they've already pulled all the army books. So it will be literally impossible to do so. Now, that being said, all the books are online, so they could just easily edit all the PDFs, republish them, and be like, here's all the point values, here's all the organization chart, here's all this and that. And then, okay, then it's a game again. You could play it. You could play the game. It wouldn't be terrible, it wouldn't be great, but it would be a very simplistic version of fantasy, but it would be playable. This game is not playable. It is a complete waste of time, is what it is. It's a waste of time to play. I would rather play fucking Monopoly. Monopoly is more balanced than this fucking game. Like, it's literally just a fucking joke.